And joining me from China is Victor Gao, Chair and Professor at the Suzhou University. Victor Gao was the former interpreter of the former Chinese President Deng Xiaoping. And I want to begin by asking you, Mr. Gao, analysts say that these protests from Xinjiang to Shanghai are spontaneous. Why does the Chinese government believe that this is the work of outside hostile forces?
First of all, it's very rare to have multiple protests happening in many cities in China. It seems that these protests were coordinated by someone. Whether it is domestic forces or international forces, I think an investigation is required. Secondly, for example, where I live in Beijing, on Monday and today on Tuesday, everything is very quiet. I think the protests went away. And I think the government need to address the legitimate concerns expressed in the protests and try to make the zero COVID policies more acceptable to the people and more adapted to the changing circumstances in China. I think it's the same case in Shanghai. You were talking about new protests in several other cities, but I think the focus of the protests have remained the focus on the zero COVID policy. And I truly believe China is in transition between one paradigm to a new paradigm. And I hope whatever differences there are, grievances or complaints will be worked out in an amicable way.
Sure. Professor Chilani, are these regular protests against the policies of Xi Jinping's administration? People are sick and tired of this zero COVID policy, or is this much bigger and more widespread than that is being made out to be?
The repressive lockdowns clearly were the trigger, but the protests have snowballed into something more fundamental and unprecedented. They have become anti-Xi Jinping and anti-Communist Party demonstrations. They have shaken the regime in Beijing. After all, the protesters in Beijing, Shanghai, and elsewhere have been shown on camera bravely chanting slogans like Xi Jinping, leave, leave, and Communist Party, out, out. Even though many protesters have been arrested and the government is now cracking down on other protesters using facial recognition technology, including mobile data tracking system to arrest other participating protesters. And yet, we have seen these protests continue. This suggests a groundswell of popular support for reversing the Communist Party's increasing repression in China. And it also serves as evidence, if any evidence were needed, that the Xi Jinping-led communist regime retains power, not through popular backing, but through brute force. And the protesters have been mostly young people.
Yes.
And they have openly been demanding democracy and freedom. They have been holding blank sheets of paper which have become a symbol of protest against repressive policies. And I think the most important message that comes out from these protests is that this is a spontaneous popular uprising against Communist Party rule. This is a watershed moment for China, especially as it comes when China is facing a deepening economic slowdown. It also comes at a time when unfavorable views of China, according to a global survey, are at near historic highs or near historic highs in most advanced economies.
Yeah.
But instead of undertaking a course correction, Xi Jinping's regime has been doubling down on its draconian steps at home and renegade actions internationally. So
absolutely.